Hi, this is Nancy with On Point TV. Today we are going to bring to you the final episode of the Quilt As You Go series. We've been taking you through how to do the block by block techniques, making the quilted tiles. So let me show you just a couple of the books that we've worked through so far. So the first one is the Learning to Quilt book. So this is the book that I wrote that you can purchase on our website that takes you through how to make the cables, how to do the invisible machine applique, how to do the quilting, how to do the proper cutting. All of that information is in the Learning to Quilt book, plus a whole lot more. It makes an entire quilt that looks kind of like that. That's what it looks like. So if you've not seen any of the Learning to Quilt series, you can go back to episode 1 is the very first episode where we start taking you through that. So all of that is available on the website, and this is the first book that we used. Then we went to the book by Beth Donaldson. This is an older book, no longer in print, was originally published by the Patchwork Place Martingale. Beth Donaldson is the author. The book is called Block by Block. It is no longer in print, but many, many people have been able to find it at some really great prices on eBay and Amazon and wherever it is that you find. But I do highly recommend that first you call all of your quilting friends and ask them if they've got it, and you could borrow it from them, or your quilt guild maybe has a library. So look for this book. Remember that this is the original with the brown quilt on it. The second version of it, if you will, had a blue cover. It's the exact same book. You do not need to buy it twice, although you could buy it and give it to a friend because I'm sure they would enjoy it too. What we're going to work on today is the borders, and the instructions for the borders come from the Quilting in Sections book by Marti Michell. This is a current book. It is self-published by Marti Michell. Marti Michell is still teaching all over the place too. So this is the book that you want to find. You can go to your local quilt shop and be able to find this book. There's a ton of different quilt as you go techniques in this book, but not the block by block technique. That's why I use that book for the blocks, this book for the borders, and there's a lot more than just borders in this book also. What we're working on is the variations of the quilted tiles. So this is what I called my Dutch quilted tiles. I'll show you a couple of the other designs. There's another one. That was one of what I called the Greek quilted tiles because it was from some Greek tiles I bought when I was in Greece. And with those, you are able to get just the pattern. And what I mean by that is on our website, when you go down to the shopping area, you're going to find the link for the patterns. And this is what you'll see. It's just a printout. This is just what it is. And this will give you some help designing. I did not put them all there because my intention is not that everybody duplicate my quilts. My intention is that you learn how to do your own. And if you go back to the first episode of the quilting tiles, you will find how to make your own. It's not that hard, and then it's your very own design. But if you want to get started, these are available on the website, onpoint-tv, down in the shop section, and they're free. You gotta like that. So today we're going to work on the borders. So I'm going to bring the quilt over that we're going to work on the borders, and we'll get started. So this is the quilt that we're going to put the border on. So this was the original one that I made, and I can't quite remember what we called it, Mediterranean tiles or something like this. So again, all these designs are available on the website if you wanted to duplicate one of these. But this I did the block by block, so this has already been each block quilted and assembled like I showed you in just a couple of episodes ago. And now it's time to put the border on. You want to remember before you put the border on that you need to complete the quilting in all of the sashings going all the way around. So there was times where I told you don't quilt that sashing, do quilt this sashing. Now you want to make sure everything is quilted, so even your cornerstones you want to have quilted. Everything on the quilt top is quilted. Now it's time to put the borders on. So I want you to imagine that I have not put this one on yet. And this is what it's going to look like in your layering process. But this is what you're going to do. Here we go. This is your border, your backing for your border. Now keep in mind these are cut the length of grain on the fabric. I showed you how to do that when we were cutting out the backings for our blocks, and that there was fabric left that you could use for your borders. So this is a nice long piece that I cut of my backing for the backing of the borders, and I've put the batting on. So I cut my batting about a ½ inch smaller than the actual backing border itself, and I've attached the batting to the backing border with the fusible, the same fusible that we used for the block techniques. So I took some of this fusible, I laid it down on top, and I ironed it in place, and that is going to keep my batting a little bit away from the seam. And if you think about it, it makes perfect sense. I really don't know why it took me so long to figure this out. I used to have the batting go all the way to the edge, and then I had to try to trim the batting, just these little slivers. And now I've realized if I put this down at a 1/2 inch, when my seam, my 1/4 inch seam is sewn and it's folded over, it actually will meet right up with that, so I won't have all that additional bulk, but yet the batting is going to hold on beautifully with this fusible, and I'm going to quilt it in place anyhow. So take your backing border first, your batting, which is a 1/2 inch smaller, and you're going to just line it up a 1/2 inch, and then using your batting fusible tape, so this is the Heat Press Batting Together. This is one of the brands I use, and then Marti Michell has her own brand also. Take that, lay it down, and attaching it to it, this is now in place. So we're going to first put on our first inner border. So that's what I've done on the 2 sides. So I've pinned it. I'm going to show you how to do this. This one's already been done, so I got to kind of just talk you through it. So I've got my backing and batting, my quilt top, and my inner border, and I sewed that and then flip this out. So that what I'm seeing now would be a border of just batting, which is not pretty, but in a minute we'll cover it up. After I've done the 2 sides, then I do the top. And that's where it gets a little bit, not tricky, but it's just something you got to work a little bit harder on to remember. So this is what it's going to look like when it's done, so that the inner border has just come to the edge of the inner border on the 2 sides. And I'm going to put that in place now. So we're going to go to the other end. The first thing I need to do is make sure that my side borders are trimmed straight. So you see here, whoops, picked up something on the floor. There we go. Here I need to trim this straight. So I'm going to just use a ruler and a rotary cutter. It's on here somewhere. I'm going to line up a line of my ruler on the seam and then square this off. So now the edge of the quilt is all squared, and I can put my borders on. So here is my backing border. I'm going to lay it down first. Gets a little bit cumbersome, so just to hang with it, take your time. There's no rushing. Have your pins ready with you. So this is my pin cushion that is with me all the time, which is available for purchase on the OnPoint-TV, blah, blah, blah. You know all of that. And I do like to use the big yellow head pins for this. Normally, my pin of choice is going to be the Clover glass head pins, but for Quilt As You Go, these big yellow ones that are called quilter's pins actually work the best. So I'm laying down the border backing that has the batting attached to it, and I'm laying it down so the batting is down and the backing is up. Now I'm going to take my quilt top and lay it down right side up. So when you're thinking about it, you've got the 2 backings are together. That's exactly where you want them. That's where you're going to start sewing. So lay this down and then add your inner border. So my inner border is cut. It's a little longer than I need, but I'm going to have it start right where the inner border stopped on the sides of the quilt. So it's going to start there, which means that when you first start sewing, you will be sewing through batting, backing, backing, and batting, but actually it's the fusible right there. You will start sewing with just that. Then you will jump over and start sewing on the inner border. I recommend that you take your time with the pinning, doing your very best to keep it laid very flat. And I use lots of pins. So I'm going to lay this down. I'm trying to not pull my border. I don't want it to be pulled out of whack, so just let it lay nice and flat. Put your pins in about every 2 inches. So we're to the end here, and you'll see that my inner border is actually longer than my inner border that's on the side. So I'm going to show you what I do here. I'm going to keep pinning all the way to that inner border. Put a couple more in. I've got a few more to go back and put in. And then if you fold the extra length of the inner border so that it's nice and square and even with the edge of the inner border on the side of the quilt, then just take your scissors and cut that off. Then that's nice and straight. And then we can continue the pinning. And at the other end, just like at the beginning, it's going to be the batting, backing, backing, and the batting again. So I'm going to put a few more pins in here, and then I'll meet you back at my sewing machine. So I'm at my machine now, and I have my quilt all pinned together. So come a little bit closer. I want you to see. So now it's pinned, and when you look at it on the back side, you can see where that inner facing is holding the batting in place. So that's a 1/2 inch from the edge. It's going to be so cool when I show you when we press it how this is going to come just butt right even to it. I've set my machine up with a normal 1/4 inch. Because of all this bulk, the scant 1/4 inch can be a little bit too narrow. So I recommend you go to a normal 1/4 inch, just 1 or 2 bops to the left. And with my machine, because it is a FAF, I don't know if you can see back here, but I have a built-in walking foot. So I do not need to put the walking foot on. If you have anything other than a FAF or one of the machines that does not have a walking foot, you want to attach your walking foot now and move your needle to the right to find your 1/4 inch seam allowance. We're going to start sewing. And I want to do a nice knot right there in the beginning, which we don't normally do in quilting, but for this you want to. And then we're going to just keep sewing, going nice and slow over those big needles. Keep in mind the reason that these big needles work for this is because of all of this thickness. When you're normally sewing, these needles, the ball on the head of them is just too big, and it raises your machine up off the surface, or the foot off the surface. So with this, because it is so thick, you don't have to worry about that. Those thick needles really work good for this. You always want to be very cautious when going over those needles to not drive like Mario Andretti. You want to drive nice and calmly, go a little bit slower, so I might go a little bit slower, and then pick up my tempo again. I do have a little bit of a thicker needle in, whereas normally I'm going to piece with a Microtex 75 or Microtex 70. For this one, you're going to want to go to an 80 or 90 needle because you are going through quite a bit of layers, and you want to be sure that your needle is going to be able to handle the thickness. Don't worry about whether or not your machine can do the job. I have done this technique on my now 42-year-old Kenmore that was just a normal machine, nothing fancy. So this machine happens to be a very strong machine, but it's not like any machine can't do this. And as I'm stitching it, I am also holding from the back to the front. I am not feeding it through my machine, but I'm making sure that it's through nice and even, because sometimes, because this piece is not quilted, it might be a little bit fluffier if you want. So I just like to hold it to make sure that I'm not getting any pleats next to my pins. And if you have your walking foot on, you probably are going to be okay anyway. This can be kind of heavy, so you want to be sure that your machine is set up with some surface space on the left-hand side so that your quilt can rest there. If it gets too heavy and you don't have a surface space that's big enough to the left of your sewing machine, the quilt can have a tendency to pull out, and that's going to give you not a very good seam allowance. So I'm coming to the edge where it actually has the inner border right to here, and now you can see that I'm going to be going from the inner borders to just the batting. And I think the first couple times you do it, it kind of seems odd that you're just sewing with batting on top, but trust me, it really, really works. So as I come to this end, I am going to again do a backing stitch. I just want it to be a little bit stronger and cut it off, and I'll meet you back at the cutting table. Now I have the inner border sewn on, and I want to show you that idea where I was putting the interfacing and so the batting was a 1/2 inch away from the edge, why that works. So this is our backing, and here you can see the interfacing holding the batting a 1/2 inch from the edge. Now watch this, this is so cool, because now when the quilt is pressed toward the border, where there was no batting, now has the batting from the quilt. So we don't have additional batting there. That's pretty cool. I used to do it where I was sewing through the batting. Now I would be taking scissors and trying to cut out little slivers of batting, and that was no fun. But now I don't need to do that because I'm using that interfacing. So love that. Now I'm going to go to my ironing board and I'm going to press this over, and then I'll show you how we'll put on our final border. So we have the inner borders all sewed on, and I've pressed them out. Now it's time to add the final border. Now keep in mind, you could do a bunch of little borders if you wanted to. You could add and keep stitching and flipping to add a lot of different types of borders, but I'm going easy here. So I've got my inner border on. This is my outer border. I have torn it length of grain, just like I always do. So I have one big long piece to stitch on it, and I'm going to just lay it down in place and use my, again, I'm going to use my little bit of a bigger pin just because it's a lot to go through, because it's going to go through the batting. And I'm going to do just like always. I'm going to put pins every 2 inches. And the idea, I'm going to just turn these so that you'll see, and you're going to be doing what is called stitch and flip. So pretend that these pins are actually the stitching that is going to be done. After you're done stitching it, you bring it back and you flip it over. So then you have pieced on your final border. As you would imagine, on the top and the bottom, you'll do the same thing, but the border will actually go all the way along the edge. All right? Then you're done. Well, okay, you're not totally done. You do need to still finish some quilting, so you'll be able to do some of the quilting in the border, which is quite easy because it's toward the edge of the quilt, so it makes it a little bit easier to do that. The only thing, the caveat to making it not be that it's not as easy, is that you don't have as much backing and batting here on the edge as I normally like to have. So if you go back to some of my basting videos, I like to have 4 inches on the edge. I don't know why, but with Quilt As You Go, I don't do that. I always make it about the same size. So when it comes time to quilt the edge, it makes it a little bit harder to get toward the edge, but I'm sure that you will be able to manage it. If you'd like any tips on any of the quilting, you can go back to some of those episodes from the Learning to Quilt series. I think we did like 5 or 6 episodes just on machine quilting, what threads to use, walking foot or free motion, and using a quilting table, gloves or lickety grip, all these different things. So you can go back there and find out more information on that. And then you reach back and pat yourself on the back and say, I have finished my Quilt As You Go. I hope you have enjoyed this series. I've gotten a lot of really great feedback from people telling me that they always wanted to do a Quilt As You Go, but they just couldn't get started, and that the videos are really helping them. So I'm hoping that they will help you too. Please let me know. I love hearing from you. If you have a comment, please leave it below in the comment section. If you would like to purchase the Learning to Quilt book or the pin cushion or get those free quilted tiles patterns, you can go to the OnPoint-TV website to shop, and at the very bottom of this video is a link that'll take you to the topic finder. So if you want to find out more about the quilting and more about the invisible machine applique, so there's a lot of things there for you too. Thank you very much for watching. If you like the show, please subscribe, hit the notifications button. You never know when we might go live. Have a great day.